I did want to tap
Joe
this.
Budden and Ice called out QueenzFlip for his unprofessional behavior.
Let me explain this. Basically, there's a new oncoming arc that is coming out hot and heavy. QueenzFlip, it would appear, is kind of like working his way out of the good graces of the No Jumper podcast. Or excuse me, the Joe Budden podcast. And I will give you guys at least some numbers to check with here. Let's check this out. Improper improv. Oh yeah, this ain't looking good. Wow, that is really bad. Look at this. So okay. Improper Improv was a series that QueenzFlip and Joe Budden started on the Joe Budden platform, right? So this is the live tab right here on this platform. And as you can see, wasn't very little live content throughout the history of the No Jumper or of the Joe Budden podcast. I'm gonna have to stop doing that. And then they start doing this improper improv thing. It's doing okay. 200K, 259K, you know, averaging around like 200K and change, right? And then it just stops one day. And it was heavily rumored that the reason why Joe Budden put a halt to this live content was because he felt like it was basically just not high quality enough. You get me? So essentially it stopped for like, I don't know, a year. And then just recently it's made its return. And the numbers are looking a little rough. 135K on the return. Now, keep in mind, this is the big return. This is like they haven't done it in a long time, over a year. It comes back 135K, and now the new one has 75K. And word on the streets, according to Joe Budden historian Danny from the Stop, is that this is just overall being viewed as a bit of an L. I don't know why people are acknowledging that we don't get as good of numbers, which is not really true. Like, this is pretty much like what the average No Jumper show will get. It'll get between like 80, 90 and like 120, 130, something like that. Either way, you're retarded, because I'm not talking about us. I'm talking about how this content is doing. And obviously, like, when the Joe Budden podcast is consistently getting, you know, 400,000 views on the main podcast, and then Joe allows QueenzFlip to basically like start his own content, and it's doing, you know, 20% or less of what the content on their main pod does, obviously that's going to largely be viewed as an L. That doesn't have anything to do with No Jumper. That's just in comparison to QueenzFlip's, or in comparison to the rest of the content on their channel. Okay, I should point out too that it's not just that the improper improv thing doesn't seem like it's performing that well. In addition to that, it feels like a primary narrative amongst the fan base is basically that Flip is kind of annoying. Flip is destructive to the flow of the podcast, that he's kind of immature. I'm trying to like capture the ideas represented by the fans, not so much you know, my personal opinions, because I mostly just watch this reaction channel, and be totally real. But it pisses a lot of people off that they think that he sort of degrades the quality of the content. So that's really what's being discussed here. And I think when you combine that with the poor performance of the improper improv thing, a lot of people are looking at this like this is a possibly untenable situation. Somebody said Flacco is the Flip of No Jumper. I mean, Flacco's not on like the main No Jumper content. I don't know who I would really consider or compare it to. I feel like AD was kind of like closer to the Flip of No Jumper, in the sense that he brought this kind of like wacky, zany, crazy energy to the table, right? And like the fans liked it at first. Maybe as time went by, it kind of wore on them and became less popular than, you know, maybe it seemed in the short term. But at least in the short term, you know, it was popular. But then as time went by, I felt like it kind of wore away its appeal. And he's had to, you know, pivot into content that has a little bit more legs since then.
interesting relationship. I think Joe was assigned to On Top Entertainment, which is tied to Webb and Nitty, and Flip is related to those folks. That's why.
Somebody saying AD did not bring energy. Well, you clearly weren't around for the early days of the November show, because I feel like that was really what he kind of brought that was very, very good for the channel in the beginning. Was there was just a lot of energy, you know? It was like, it might have been kind of crazy and silly and, you know, the 4 jokes thing, but it was definitely energy. Okay, so now he's breaking down why he thinks that the improper improv thing is not meant to last. And this is kind of the other thing about it, too, is that Flip wanted Joe Budden to not be on improper improv, even though Joe Budden was part of the initial era of improper improv. Now that it's been resurrected, Flip wants to do it without him. And when the views are looking pretty meager, that looks a little weird, right? Because obviously Joe being on it might double the views, you know? So him kind of like requesting to do it solo, yes, you get to see more of what Flip's vision is for it. Joe Budden being there is going to basically, like, you know, keep it in a certain box. But it would appear that QueenzFlip doing it solo is having a debilitating effect on the overall view count.
And parked outside of Joe's house, which is super unprofessional and would get you fired from most businesses.
Including this one. Holy shit, if I suspended somebody from the podcast and then they fucking parked outside of my crib, number one, you're going to be waiting a long time, like possibly forever. Like, you might die out there, because realistically, I'm not coming out. I'm not talking to you. You want to park us? I'm flipping out. That's not cool. That's not even like, that's not even a consideration. I mean, I might go out and just scream at you and tell you to never fucking do that again. But holy shit, if I put you on leave from the show, and that, to be totally real, and I'll get into the more interesting Joe Budden content momentarily, but I've seen Joe Budden put Flip on suspension. And then that makes me think, like, oh my God, can you imagine if I had ever done that? Could you imagine if I had told AD, like, during Prime November show, like, listen, you fucked up, you got to take a couple weeks off? Oh, man. I don't think he's coming back. I think it would have been just an explosion. Like, the ego wouldn't be able to handle it. I'm surprised Flip was able to handle it.